A guy named Mike Nemeth called me, and he was like, "Man, I'm just calling to check on you." He's like, "How you doing?" I was like, "Man, I'm down on the canvas." He's like, "I know. That's why I'm calling." He's like, "You gotta get up. We gotta get back in the fight."
Welcome to Executives Unplugged, where we dive into case studies and coaching sessions to elevate your leadership. I'm Keith Cowing, executive coach to CEOs and product leaders. And today my guest is Mike Steadman. Mike was a decorated collegiate athlete. He is a Navy veteran, and now he is a business coach to veteran entrepreneurs as well as a brand builder. And Mike has an incredible story. He is quite a leader, quite a human, and he's going to coach us on resilience and how to bounce back even when pressure seems insurmountable, and how to focus our brand and our offering even in a crowded market. But our story starts today in a boxing gym in Newark, New Jersey. Let's go. Mike, welcome to Executives Unplugged. Thanks for joining me.
Keith, man, it's a pleasure. I have not done nearly as many podcasts like I used to before because I used to host a show. But you're the first. I think you're the first podcast I've been on in 2025, man. So it's a pleasure.
All right. Well, lucky me. Good way to kick off the year. And we've talked a lot about business coaching, a lot about the work that you do. One of the things I love about leadership is it's all about different perspectives, different tensions, different stakeholders that you work with, and getting exposure to a lot of different things. You had a really unique experience. You were running a nonprofit boxing gym in Newark, New Jersey through COVID, and you had to deal with some serious leadership moments there. Take us into that moment and one of the decisions that you had to make, some of the leadership things that tested you as a human, as a leader.
Well, I go by Iron Mike, right? So people call me, Iron Mike, and everybody assumes it's because of my boxing accolades at the Naval Academy. I was a 3-time national boxing champ, 2-time most valuable boxer, captain of my boxing team, etc. But the reason I call myself Iron Mike is because of COVID. I had spent, the last 5 years hooking and jabbing in Newark, New Jersey, teaching boxing, started the Ironbound Boxing Academy, and felt like I was finally starting to make some traction. And then as soon as the NBA got canceled during the pandemic, I think it was like March 9th or whatever, I just felt like it was over. You know, Businesses fail for primarily two reasons. Number one, no market need, and number two, they run out of cash. And virtually overnight, there was no need for boxing. The city of Newark made us close down our gym. At the time, I was earning income teaching on-site boxing classes to company like Spotify, WeWork, NextJump. So I was like the head boxing instructor at Spotify NYC, and it just went away. It evaporated. And at that moment, I was just like, this is it, man. You know? And that was a very surreal feeling when it's like you spent all this time to build something and feeling like it just was, the rug was pulled out underneath you. And I had a West Point grad, a guy named Mike Nemeth called me, and he was like, "Man, I'm just calling to check on you." He's like, "How you doing?" I was like, "Man, I'm down on the canvas." He's like, "I know. That's why I'm calling." He's like, "You got to get up. We got to get back in the fight." And I just started calling myself Iron Mike. And it just kind of stuck. And then people start calling me, and then now that's what everybody knows me, at least in the veteran entrepreneurial community, is like Iron Mike. Nothing against Mike Tyson. He was great in the ring, but my story is just a little bit different. And then it is a little suggestive, right? The gym is the Ironbound Boxing Academy, so the brand's Ironbound. But yeah, man, I had to give myself a ground punch. And it was funny too, because that experience really helped me gain some confidence because I was able to bounce back. We ended up launching like an entrepreneurial program essentially. And then the other aspect of it was all the goodwill I had built up over time. When people start to support nonprofits, I was one of the first ones that they thought of. So we actually came out of the pandemic better than we went in. I spun up a new business model around podcasting as well. It was something I had in the back of my mind. And we're going to talk about coaching, but I told my business coach that, hey, I want to do podcasting. And he told me it was a distraction. But I was like, whatever. I still was reading the books. I still launched my podcast. And then when the pandemic hit, I was able to pull on that lever. But that would have never happened had I not nurtured those skills. And I had prepped myself for podcasts for probably about a year. I met with some different kind of podcasts, early podcast networks. I read a bunch of books, took some courses online, etc. And I had started my own podcast that I was able to essentially white label and bring to others. And then it just kind of took off. So I know that's probably a lot to unpack there. But I think the moral of that really was just about the importance of kind of self-talk, and that was my first time truly experiencing that. I don't want to say anything is possible, but that sometimes you really got to dig down and save yourself, because there were no guarantees. Nobody made me do any of that. Nobody made me pull those pivots, pull those triggers. And I basically just couldn't sit down and be a victim. I had to get after it, and that's exactly what I did.
Everybody's been in a moment where it just feels like the pressure's coming from every direction and you feel like you're on the mat, whether it's in reality or not. And you just can't imagine how you're going to get out of this situation. Psychologically, if you can handle it, if you can manage through constraints and crises, breed creativity. And you said you came back even better, but that wasn't guaranteed. So in that moment, how long did that last? Is this 3 months? Is this 6 months? Is this 2 years? What'd that bounce back look like?
It was honestly about a week and a half, because, like, again, so there's this book called
That's fast.
there's this
That's
book
really
called
fast.
there's this book called The Four Agreements, and one of the things it talks about is never assumed. See, I assumed that there was no market need for boxing anymore, at least on-site boxing, so it was a wrap. I start to get calls. Spotify hit me up. They said basically, "Hey, can you teach your classes virtually? We got a bunch of people at home and stuff, etc." And I was like, "Let's go." But even before that, when Mike had called me and said we got to get up off the canvas, I knew we were a nonprofit organization. I also knew that there were a bunch of kids and families at home, and so I got to do something. So one of the first things I did, and this is important about in those moments, just taking action. Sometimes any action is better than nothing. I start to go live on Instagram. You remember that, when all the fitness instructors were going live?
Mm-hmm.
So I would just go on live and organize like a daily workout for the kids at home. So I ordered a bunch of stuff off Amazon, right? I set my little camera up in my room, in my apartment in Newark, and I started to go live every day at 4 o'clock. And everybody would come on, and I would teach my classes and stuff. And so I had got some reps in. So when Spotify, and all these other companies started calling me, asking if I could teach boxing online, I had already gotten some reps in. I had already had the equipment, so boom, I was back at it. And it felt very humbling too at that time, because it was like, okay, I'm still in the fight. I'm still able to earn income. This isn't bad. But it did introduce a new constraint that we're going to get into.
And you're mentioning the kids, you're mentioning 4 o'clock, that every day at 4 o'clock, I imagine having some structure, something to count on, something that is in your control could make a big difference. I imagine for the kids as well. When you talk about the people that were taking these boxing classes, talk a little bit about who were your stakeholders here? Who was counting on you as a leader in that moment to not give up?
Yeah, our young athletes, right? So we target primarily youth and young adults between the ages of 10 and 22. And one of the reasons we say, young adults is because in environments like Newark and other inner cities across the country, you might have people that graduate high school, but they're still living at home. They don't have a full-time income, right? Especially if they don't go to college, et cetera. And so, whereas programs tend to turn them away because they're now kind of young adults and they only want to cater to youth, we just kind of extended that. I mean, some people call them opportunity youth, et cetera. But one thing about us was, in the flywheel, the top of our flywheel was always focused on the impact. That's what it was, and that can mean a lot of different things. But, essentially, it's like, where can we make impact? And that's what motivated me to just kind of get up and start moving, doing those online workouts. And that was my way of making impact. Because when I moved to Newark in 2015, I didn't have a gym. I would just pick kids up and drive them to a local boxing gym, pay the gym owner for me to train them, right? But that wasn't like a sustainable kind of business model as you start to grow.
What did you learn about yourself as a leader going through that experience, figuring out how to do the self-talk, how to bounce back, how to be creative under pressure?
For a slight moment, I thought I cured imposter syndrome, you know, because there was no one. That was literally one of those situations where no one was coming to save us. Yeah, there was nothing, and there were, like I told you before, there were no guarantees. And so for me to kind of lean in, for me to make those decisions on my own, I got an email from a board member that basically was like, Mike, this is probably it. Now's the time to kind of look at for yourself and your future and yada, 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 and I just decided to kind of persevere and push through. Um, and like my background growing up, I was raised in like a single parent home, went through some challenging things in the childhood, especially early adulthood. My mom had a stroke while I was at the Naval Academy, so she's been basically bedridden in a nursing home ever since. And it's something that I'm working through these days. Is like, there's all these conversations about the meritocracy and stuff, et cetera, right? Like basically the sky's the limit. You know, you can do whatever you kind of put your mind to, but until you experience it, until you see it, until you touch it, right? It's hard to really grasp that. And that's not to take away from my success, at the Naval Academy, being a Marine infantry officer, all those things that I set out to do that I was able to accomplish. But man, business and entrepreneurship is a whole different ball game. Literally the ability to create value out of thin air with a laptop and a Google Doc and a microphone, for me to experience that created a whole new level of confidence in myself.
Let's fast forward to that. You were in a boxing gym in Newark dealing with COVID. You felt like you're on the mat. You had to bounce back. Not that many years later, you're now a business coach. You're helping veterans that are entrepreneurs run their companies, get their brand straight. What did that transformation look like for you?
It was gradual. Like I really looked up to my boxing coach at the Naval Academy, a guy by the name of Jim McNally. And, like I mentioned before, because my mom had that stroke in Navy, that was my sophomore year. So I really kind of leaned into boxing as my outlet. And that's one of the reasons I was so successful in the ring. And so I've always felt this personal responsibility to give back to a sport that I credit with actually helping me graduate the Naval Academy in the first place. And so that's what's one of the things that inspired me to move to Newark, start Ironbound, etc. And I saw myself like Coach McNally. Like that's who I wanted to be like. I want to be a boxing coach, and I want to be the head boxing coach at the Naval Academy, etc. But then I ended up winning a grant in 2019 for $25,000 from the Street Shares Foundation for Ironbound. And right around that time, right, like I went full time in Ironbound in 2018. This was back when social enterprise was like the buzzwords, right? So I had the nonprofit, which was the Boxing Academy in Newark, and I was standing up a for-profit, which were my on-site boxing classes. And so I got a grant for $25K, but I felt like I was like all over the place. I lacked focus. I was like, this is hard. I feel like I gotta, and I didn't know that I was looking for a business coach at the time, but I was seeking something. And you heard these terms like executive coach or productivity coaches. I had no idea what they meant, but I just was assuming that that's what I kind of needed. So I won $25,000 from the Street Shares Foundation. And Mike, the same person that called me and told me to get up off the canvas, a year prior, he had introduced me to became my business coach, Bill Watkins. So when I won that grant, I hired Bill. I paid $6,000 up front because, again, I was seeking. I just knew I needed to help. And so that drastically changed my experience of entrepreneurship and what to expect out of it, because I had a corner man who kind of had that objectivity and was really focused on business, life, and self, and enjoying the journey along the way and making sure that we're accounting for the people on the exterior, right? Your partners, your kids, and et cetera, et cetera. But having that experience, and I really looked up to Bill, and I thought in my mind, like, oh, this would be cool to be a coach one day like him. What I wasn't banking on was in 2022, he approached me about being a coach. And talk about self-confidence and imposter syndrome. I'm like, who the heck am I to be a coach, right? I started a boxing gym in Newark, on the nonprofit side. And then I bootstrapped this, podcast branding agency. But like, I'm not ready to coach yet. He's like, Mike, you'd be a great coach. And that was, you talk about leadership decisions. Bill's somebody I looked up to. He's a little bit older, wiser, has been doing this for years. And I saw this as like a window of opportunity, and you and I talk about value for value. We can learn from a lot of different people and opportunities, etc. And so essentially it was like a Yoda Luke Skywalker situation, and Bill trained me to be a professional business coach. We worked a lot on mindset first, the confident mind, what it takes to win, right? A lot of the athlete thing, because he knew what I didn't know, which was everybody assumes the coach got it all figured out. But then when you sit down on that screen and you're on the other side of that laptop, you got to deliver, and when you're dealing with a CEO, right, that that's looking at you for that guidance and wisdom, it can feel a little intimidating, but yeah, I went 6 months without a coaching client. And then at the 6-month mark, boom, So it wasn't an overnight thing by any means. And then the first year, you get those coaching clients, you're working on delivering value. But then over time, you just kind of start to come into your own.
Let's go back to the self-talk. You talked about imposter syndrome. You talked about self-talk. You went through that when you're on the mat in Newark with the gym. Now you're transforming into being a coach, and you've got these same types of moments. I'm sure there were moments of doubt that everybody goes through of, yeah, is this really going to work? You go 6 months without a client. You got to have the grit and the fortitude and the vision. And entrepreneurs deal with this. There's moments of, is this really going to work? And it feels like the world's caving in on you. And you got to have the self-talk and the self-care to be able to make it through that, along with the vision. How do you do self-talk? How do you get yourself through that moment, either emotionally or physically too?
So I'm learning. Okay. I'm going to take off my armor here and get a little bit vulnerable. So I created this. I was reading a lot of books, How Champions Think, What It Takes to Win, The Confident Mind, right? And those were things that Bill had kind of, recommended for us because I wasn't the only coach. There was a group of us that were learning, how to be coaches and stuff, etc. And I would do my little affirmation, right? So I would have that affirmation and look at myself in the mirror and say, I'm a freaking, world-class business coach, yada, yada, yada. But you know what really um, helped more than anything else was getting the reps in, just freaking coaching, taking a swing at the plate, having those calls. And at one point, Bill had recommended, he said, to be a coach, you got to coach. And to be a coach, you got to be able to sell coaching. And I had just written my book. I wrote a book, Black Veteran Entrepreneur, Evaluate Your Business Model, Build Your Brand, and Step into Greatness. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to start coaching Black veteran entrepreneurs on the side, right? So I got the book. It's an easy sell on the marketing side. And so I did get a few, I don't want to call it low margin, but low, just some clients just to kind of get the reps in and have that. So even though I didn't have like clients at my ideal kind of rate yet, right? I was still coaching, I was volunteering, I was doing that on the side. And that slowly over time, was building my confidence up because I was getting more swings at the plate. You and I were going to talk about sales at some point. And how many founders say they suck at sales and that they don't like sales? But yet, how many of them have actually done like 1,000 sales calls or 100 sales calls? It's easy to say you don't like something, you're not good at it when you've never done it, But I equate it to like, swinging at the plate like baseball, you know? If you do like 99 swings and you finally hit that home run, it's like, okay, now you get the experience of it. But to, do sales, like do like 2 sales calls and then be like, I don't like it, I'm not good at it. You're not really giving yourself a chance. And so that was one of the things that I have learned with regards to, and it goes back to what we talked about earlier, is like, listen, man, forget what you think. Action, action, action. I thought writing a book was going to make me feel like a writer and an author. It did while I was writing the book. But once the book finished, imposter syndrome again, it's like, I'm not really an author. I don't really feel like a writer yet. But when I journal every day, I freaking feel like a writer. You know why? Because I'm writing. One of the reasons I feel so confident as a coach these days is because I coach almost every day of the week, with the exception of the weekend. So yeah, imposter syndrome, it's there. And it was definitely there when I moved to Newark because my best friends were going to Harvard Business School, Ward, and all these schools. And I'm like holding mitts in Newark, trying to stop leaks, making nothing, right? But then over time, you just start to realize everybody's got their own journey, their own path. And those same friends now recommend me to people that are struggling with their small business or just need a coach, etc.
I think it's a really important lesson there about motion versus action. I talk to entrepreneurs a lot about this, where we're frequently drawn to the things that we're comfortable doing. And sometimes it's motion, it's activity. It looks like you're being productive, but planning and scrubbing your pipeline is motion. Talking to a customer is action. If you're a healthcare company and you're getting everything set up and started, okay, that's motion, you have to do it. But action is seeing your first patient. Action is having your first sales call, your first coaching meeting, even if you don't call it coaching, just doing it. And absolutely, I can say in my own journey becoming a coach, just doing it was by far above and beyond the most confidence inducing aspect of it. That was, oh, now I really see where I have strengths, where I can work on things, and where I was helpful, especially if you get feedback as you go.
Yeah, man, you got to get the feedback loop going because, like, I love that. And I was actually taking a note there. Stay in motion. Because when you're pontificating, when you're self-actualizing, when you're thinking too much, right, it can really mess you up, you know, versus just like taking action day by day, small, consistent action. Even going to the gym, right? Like everybody comes back, they got their old New Year resolution, etc. It's real easy to look at yourself in the mirror and be like, man, I just let myself go. Versus just going to the gym, getting those reps in 3 days a week, you know, then you'll start to you don't have to even think about it because you're actually doing the work.
Let's dive into one thing there I'd love to hear from you on the leadership side. One question I've been asking a lot of my clients this year is, what are you letting go of? Everybody wants to add something. Everybody wants to commit and make New Year's resolutions, and then nobody finishes them because they have too many other things getting in the way. And a lot of times it's the pruning that's less sexy, but more important, getting things out of the way so you can actually commit to the stuff that you want to accomplish. On your side, as a leader, as a business coach, everything that you're doing, what are you letting go of in 2025?
Oh, belief systems that no longer fit me at this phase of my life. So again, just to kind of continue taking off the armor. And this is kind of like, listen, first of all, I don't have a PhD in like coaching or psychology, but this is just my kind of take. And I think there are people out there that support this. I think a lot of times on the psychologist side of the house, sometimes it can be rooted in the past, right? Trying to adjust past trauma, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas, and there are therapists that do make that transition into coaching. Sometimes they're like, forget the past, you know? It's like the past is there. It is what it is, but let's start to build from here, and let's use where we're at now as like a foundation and craft the identity and the behaviors and the things you aspire to be, right? I grew up on a belief system that's really kind of getting challenged a lot, right? What's possible in terms of like, and you, like I said, people tell you this stuff, like you can be anything that you want to be. But again, until you experience it, until you touch it, right? Financially, you grow up going to the ATM with your mom, when she gets paid at midnight and you're at the ATM living paycheck to paycheck. That's not how I live now, and being able to travel and all these different things. But at times I still feel like that kid in the South, at the ATM with my mom. But I have to recognize that I'm in a different place, and like skill sets I picked up along the way. Like I grew up thinking I wasn't very smart. Again, that I didn't go to one of these elite MBA programs. I didn't even take the GMAT because I didn't think I was smart enough. Because just to go to the Naval Academy, I had to take the SAT like 6 times. Somebody told me that I wasn't going to get in because I didn't have the grades, So all those things. And yet I look up today, Naval Academy grad, got a master's from Rutgers, right? In American Studies, got fellowships out the wazoo, And I'm not saying that to brag, but I'm just trying to saying that is like, that is not how mentally I came into this world. And I wasn't disciplined. And now let's say I am smart. I am disciplined. I do know what's possible. Now let's build from here.
And a lot of what I hear in there is you identify as being an underdog. And
Correct.
dealing with that now that maybe you're not anymore on the outside, externally to the world, but inside that's where you come from. And you've used a lot of that in how you brand yourself and how you help your clients. I would love to hear you explain a little bit about your journey to very clearly articulating who you work with, how you help them. I think both coaches that are trying to identify who's my target audience and how do I really help them get to the next level in a way that they can understand. Because it's hard to write that first $6,000 check. You don't really know what you're getting into. But also people that aren't coaches, all entrepreneurs and product leaders and business leaders, we tend to be fuzzy because it's easy to not filter things out as opposed to being really, really crisp. And you are an expert at being really crisp on your target audience and your offering. Walk us through that journey for you of how you identified who your exact best customer is and how you help them.
Yeah, it was a journey. It wasn't an overnight thing, right? And this whole thing with like branding and marketing, I think in category first, brand second. So like, let's say business coach, that's a category. People are going to have all their assumptions about it. But I say business coach for the underdogs and the misfits, which I define as military veterans and anyone that's used to being one of one in the room. And what I start to notice in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, it's all over the place, right? You got the people from the Ivy League institutions getting $1 bazillion in funding to start their ventures, right? And they kind of all have a little bit of same flavor. And right, like in the military officer network, a lot of people go to a top 10, top 20 MBA program. Then they'll get out and they'll work in consulting or investment banking, et cetera. But if you're an academy grad or just an officer or military veteran in general, you do not go that pathway. And you're like in your hometown trying to, launch a cigar business. Who do you go to? All these other people are talking about product this, product that, and you're just like, I don't even know what I'm doing. I just need somebody I can trust. And I realized that those people self-identify as an underdog and a misfit because they themselves internally don't feel like they fit in over here, And for me, it's like, and again, this maybe my belief system's off here, right? Like the blazers, the pocket squares, and you'll see some photos of me in pocket squares, so I can't talk, right? But again, I was in the gym for like 10 years, right? So most of the time when you see me, you would see me in an Ironbound boxing hoodie. Like 99.9% of my interviews were like in a boxing hoodie, et cetera, et cetera. Because that's kind of who I was around. That's the environment I was in, et cetera. But if I internalize this idea that like to be a business person or be a business coach, you have to have like $1,000 suit on and a watch and all this other stuff. Like that's not me. I don't try to sell envy. Don't be like me, because I'm not saying be like me, drive my car, do all those things. Like that's not what I'm attracted to. I'm attracted to kind of more like just kind of realness and rawness and like let's just get each other better. And again, people just kind of start to self-identify. So really, I was basically talking about myself in a lot of the kind of content and messaging from my perspective. What I found out was it was resonating with a lot of military veterans, service academy grads that again self-identify.
And you mentioned when you first became a coach at 6 months before you got your first client. Was that correlated with you learning how to articulate that really clearly and then you getting your first customers? Or was that just, it took a little bit of time for things to get warmed up? What did that look like?
I think it was a combination of both. I think the more I was coaching, the more I start to recognize patterns across the board. And then you start to also recognize who's interested, in working with you, who's interested in giving you a chance, right? And then I started looking up and more were military veterans. And maybe that's just because that was my network, right? That's just kind of where I planted the flag. But even within the military kind of veteran network, I just noticed that, like, again, my messaging was really hitting with people.
And now you help other people that are trying to figure out their target audience, their brand, their approach and their offering. Walk us through that process a little bit. How do you help clients figure out what their strategy is and what their clarity is?
Right. So I'm what you call a category designer. I got to train in the category design dojo with Eddie Yoon and Christopher Lockhead, one of my friends and mentor. They wrote a book called Play Bigger: How Pirates, Dreamers, and Innovators Create and Dominate, markets. And I read that book during the pandemic and I was like blown away by it, to the point that I tweeted Chris and told him how inspired I was. I was this entrepreneur in Newark, and I think this would really help a lot more veterans and other people like me. He tweeted me back and said, check your DM. He sent me his number, and we spoke on the phone for like 2 hours, and we've been attached at the hip like this. And essentially, and he's probably going to get on me for this, right? But there's the whole positioning and category, right? And then you got a lot of startups that talk about, oh, we're creating this new category over here. What I do is I try to help brands and founders, because this is really CEO level led, identify like where are you playing. And in the categories, you got 3 options. Option number 1, you can go head to head with an established player. So this is out Google. We saw what's happening with DeepSeek and OpenAI. Those are head to head, right? And then typically in those situations, you have a lot of funding, right? Sometimes you've been around a little bit longer. Think of MySpace, right? But they got knocked off by Facebook, and Facebook, now Meta, social media. Okay. So option number 1 is you go head to head with an established player. Option number 2, you niche down an existing category with proven and existing demand. So for example, I use the example of Red Stripe. Okay. Budweiser was arguably back in the day the king of beer. Okay. Category kings on 76% of market share. So that means if you're not a category king, you're competing for that bottom 24% with everyone else. So the founders of Red Stripe are looking at the beer market and they're like, yo, what's kind of category can we really niche down around? Jamaican beer. You draw that line in the sand that distinguishes it from others, right? Because if it's Jamaican beer, from a brand perspective, what does that imply? Beaches, bikinis, on the water, maybe a different flavor, maybe different, a little bit lighter, right? So think Red Stripe, okay? So category, you have beer, we're gonna niche down to Jamaican beer, okay? Then option number 3 is you create a new category altogether. And so this is essentially non-alcoholic brewing. So that's the category, right? And then the brand is athletic brewing. Now, remember what I said? Just because you're the first mover doesn't mean you're going to win the category. Back in the day, one brand that came into play a lot was like O'Doul's or O'Toole's for like non-alcoholic beer. You don't even hear about them no more. If you walk in any bar and you say, hey, do you have any non-alcoholic beer options? 99.9% of the time, they're going to say athletic brewing. And to me, that signals that athletic brewing is a category king there. The other thing that you got to do from a category perspective is you got to learn to read the room. Okay. So staying on the alcohol tip, 5 years ago, if you were to go out to New York City or any city across the country and you ask the bartender if they have any non-alcoholic options, maybe they'll make you something. They're like, I could put something together or whatever. Now, at least in New York City, you go into a bar or restaurant, there's mocktails on the menu. So what does that signal? That's a growing and emerging category, okay? You think about retail right now. When I was in high school, most of the people that you saw work in retail, at least fast food, was like high schoolers, or young people. You look at retail now, you see a lot of older people, right? And then also people just don't look motivated in retail. You can tell retail's going through it. One day you go to your coffee shop and there's like 3 or 4 baristas back there. Then the next day you go there, there's one barista working behind the counter and there's like a line of 20 people out the door and he's feeling overwhelmed, right? So that lets me know from a category perspective that retail is a very, very hard industry right now. Same thing for newspapers, right? And the whole idea around this is that like Keith and I could be the best entrepreneurs in the world. But if it's 1930 and we open up a vegan barbecue restaurant, in like Alabama or somewhere, right? Like, and the market's not there, good luck. Like, again, you can have all the funding, you can have all the education, but if the market's not there, you're screwed. And so the whole thing about category, especially if you're underfunded and you're a bootstrapper, is you want to identify a wave and position yourself accordingly. And it takes a little bit of wordsmithing, a little strategic narrative, developing a good point of view, right? But it's possible.
And if somebody wants to work with you, where can they find you? It sounds like you have amazing tactical advice. You've also got the inspiration of what I like to call return on luck. Comes from the book 4 Disciplines of Execution, where everybody has bad luck, everybody has good luck. The point is, when you're down, can you get back up and just stay standing? Can you manage through the bad luck? And then when you have good luck, are you ready? And can you ride it and really just take it home? And you've clearly done both of those in your career, and you have a really sharp way of helping entrepreneurs. So if somebody's a veteran entrepreneur, where can they find you? How can they get in touch?
So I got 2 options for you. Option number 1 is just go to ironmikesteadman.com. That's right, Iron Mike Steadman. And just, reach out to me through there. Or you can go to wearethemisfits.com, which is the brand inside of the house. So, for people that might be a little bit confused, right? I spend 50% of my time doing business coaching and 50% of my time on the branding and the category side of the house. And I have a team for the nonprofit. So I've been able to be in a more executive role there and less in like the actual day-to-day.
Mike, it's been an absolute pleasure. I learn a ton every single time I talk to you. Thank you for joining me on Executives Unplugged.
Man, it's a pleasure. And I do want to say this too. We didn't even tell the audience how you and I connected.
You want to give it the story?
Yeah. So I wrote a post on LinkedIn about how I'm just so confused by these MBA programs because in my mind, like, how can you teach business if you don't teach sales? And I have clients got MBAs and I mentor people with MBAs, et cetera, et cetera. And I just thought it was crazy. Well, Keith commented and him and I went back and forth in the messaging, like good comments. And then we were able to kind of link up in person. And I think that just kind of goes back to what you said, whether it's return on luck, increase in serendipitous opportunities. But I think about my kind of platforms as more about nurturing a community. and attracting the type of people that I'm looking to build with and grow with and learn from, et cetera. So it was real cool that you know, saw that comment and you and I were able to connect, and hopefully we'll do some fun things together.
Yeah, I'm sure we will. And I appreciate that we got connected, that bias towards action of, hey, let's just chat. And that comment resonated with me, where as somebody who has an MBA and teaches in an MBA program, I'm also very critical of a lot of the ways that academia has not evolved fast enough. When I teach product or leadership courses at Cornell Tech, I'm very much trying to bring the real world of how do you build this stuff? How do you sell it? How do you go out there and make it happen? How do you have the reps, the action like you're talking about? Go talk to customers, not just, drop a spreadsheet. And what I saw in you is a lot of that spirit. And that's why we're bringing you to Cornell Tech to talk to some of the students and mentor and coach is, real world experience applied to how do you build this company and how do you make it grow? Because teaching is still really important, but the flavor of it just really has to change because the world has changed. And we've got to evolve how we both teach, but maybe even more than teaching, facilitate an environment in which people can learn. It's more like running a gym where you're just there to help them lift weights and you're providing a little bit of coaching and, form corrections that they can't see themselves. But it's about doing the reps. It's not about imagining the reps.
And getting the feedback loop started sooner rather than later. Like you said, when you talk to customers, you just learn so much, and I definitely think it's shifting because back in the day, early lean startup, it was all about like interviewing customers. That's great. But that's can also be a false positive because people will say, oh, yeah, this sounds like a great idea. Yeah, on-site boxing executives will print money for that. Man, I was looking for money under the table because why? That's a weak category. Don't get me wrong, you can earn okay, but like there was a ceiling, just in terms of what people were willing to spend for group boxing, even at the company level. But if you just listen to what people say, you would assume that they're right. But until you're out there taking those swings at the plate, then you really get the insight.
Well, this is incredibly helpful. Super happy to have you on here. And we'll promote this episode to anybody that is a veteran or an entrepreneur or just running a business and dealing with pressure and crises, how to do the self-talk, how to clarify what you're going after, how to have great return on luck. Mike, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Keith.
I find Mike to be an inspiration, both in terms of the self-talk and the perseverance and the bouncing back and the resilience. I was taking notes on tactics I can apply in my life, and I know that applies with CEOs and leaders of all kinds. And also, I really appreciate some of his advice on being very focused and specific and tailoring your offering and your market and dominating a niche. You can find more of Mike at ironmikesteadman.com. And as for me, you can sign up for my email newsletter at kc.coach for free insights and leadership tips right in your inbox. If you enjoyed this episode, please give it a 5-star review on your favorite platform. It helps the podcast and it helps other people find it and benefit from it as well.